Storm over Stalingrad by MMP. This is pretty much of a modern classic in wargaming. It came out some 10 years ago. Very enjoyable, very successful. It has, as I said, achieved a bit of a status of minor classic, both because it is based on a very well-known system in wargaming, the Storm over system, or maybe I should say the Storm over line based on the area impulse system. It's a mechanic that has been very successful in modern wargaming. And among the games that use that mechanic, this is one that does that particularly well because it captures an interesting topic, which is not all that easy to turn into exciting war games. The Battle of Stalingrad in World War II, of course, and it does that very thematically, very successfully. So right there, you already know this is a game that I like, and I'm gonna say good things about this game. What surprised me is like when I realized that I hadn't made a video about this game. I had forgotten about this game a little bit. I was reminded of it when I played this game recently, Last Battle, Hiroshima 1945, which is an area impulse game. And as I was playing it, I thought, what a nice re-implementation on a minor scale of Storm over Stalingrad games of that kind. And then I thought, I never mentioned Storm over Stalingrad. I never told my viewers of videos how good this game is. Maybe there are still one or two viewers out there that do not know about this game, maybe aspiring new war gamers that are not familiar. And I realized, why have I not reviewed this game before? I mean, I've had it for like almost 10 years, I think. Answer, very simple. I had played it way before I started making my video reviews, and by the time I started, somehow it escaped my mind. It was right there in the back of my mind. But now, there you go. Now it came back to mind, and I thought it's time to make a video so that aspiring war gamers, new war gamers, people that do not know yet about this game that has a very well respected status in modern wargamer may know about Storm over Stalingrad, a game that captures the struggle around and in Stalingrad in World War II in a way that actually turns out to be very simple, very easy to learn, and very manageable. You can play this well-known monster battle in an evening or less. Let me show you how the game works. Here you see the map of the game. Actually, there's two paper maps that you place by one another to create this long strip of land representing Stalingrad. The game right now is set up and ready to start with the reinforcement units placed on the turn track based on when they will enter the game, with cards already assigned to the two players. The players have independent decks of cards. This is not card driven in the sense that you need to play cards to perform the necessary functions of the game, but it's card assisted and you have some really neat effects coming from the cards, so most likely you will want to rely on the cards quite a bit. They add strategy, they add interesting options, and they also add chrome and flavor to the game by bringing historical detail, as you can see from some of the effects there. But there are many more effects in the decks for the players. The game, as I said, is ready to start with the German units pressing from outside of the city, pushing to get in, and with the Soviet units on the board trying to form a defense and to cordon off the area by the river where the ferry landings are. Ferry landings are very important for the Soviet player to bring in reinforcements. So this is the situation at the beginning of the game. The units in the game have three factors printed on them. We have attack factor, defense factor, and movement factor. There's also a symbol indicating the type of unit and a letter indicating the setup area. So areas are indicated by letters when they have units placed on them during setup. There's also a number indicating the terrain modifier for the defender that is attacked in that area. Players alternate taking impulses, and in each impulse you can activate an area and the units within it. The Soviet player can activate any and all of his units in the activated area. The German player has more restrictions because the German player can only activate units of a single division plus possibly independent units in the activated area. Units that are activated can perform one action. They can move or fire, not both. And after they take the action, they are flipped to their spent side, which also corresponds to the reduced side. So being spent doesn't just mean that you're inactive, it just means that you're really, really tired, really fatigued, really exhausted, and one step closer to being eliminated. So we got one action. The action can be movement, and units can move up to the full movement allowance. Entering areas usually only costs a movement point. That is, movement expenditures are not based on the terrain printed in the area, but movement expenditures may be affected by presence of enemy units because entering an area which is under enemy control or where there are enemy units costs an extra movement point. You move, or you fire. Now, interesting enough, fire may happen between units that are in the same area, or you may fire at enemy units in an adjacent area. This is pretty important because you don't have that in many area impulse games. When you're firing, you take a fire marker of your own nationality, you put it there to record that you have fired. This is important, we will see why. Another important thing is that when you activate units for an action, they all have to perform the same action. For example, they all have to fire at the same enemy area, or they all have to move into the same area. Units activated together stay together like a good family. When you are attacking, simplicity itself. You roll 2d6s, and then you add the total firepower of all of the attacking units. This is when you're calculating the attack total of the attacker. As for the defensive value, you take the single highest defense value in the area. In this here, for example, it would be this 10 here. You may be able to add the terrain modifier to your defense unless there is a fire marker of your own nationality in your area. You decide to fire, so you're not exploiting the terrain defensively, so you don't get that bonus. Also, you don't get the terrain if the opponent is firing from the same area in which you are, and also you don't get it if you do not control the terrain, you control the area. So you compare the total defense with the total attack, and whoever has the highest inflicts damage on the opponent. Damage is equal to the difference between the total defense and the total attack. The number of hit points, which correspond to that difference between the two values, must be absorbed by the loser of that fight. The number of hit points may be absorbed in various ways. There is flexibility there. You absorb them by reducing units, that is by spending fresh units, flipping them to their spent side, by retreating them, or simply by eliminating them. You can take any combination with some restrictions, but there is a certain logics to your spending, eliminating, retreating units, trying to, well, you have to take the number of hit points, but you try to do it in such a way that you find a trade-off between the damage that you take and the terrain that you give up. So you apply damage points, and well, that's pretty much it. That's how the game works. You alternate impulses, activating units to move and to fire. You have reinforcements at the end of the turn. Some German units will need to be withdrawn during the game, but pretty much this is the game. You continue until the end of turn 6, at which point victory is determined based on the number of these areas, plus 3 defense areas that the Soviet player controls at the end of the game. And that number may change from game to game. At the beginning of the game, the two players secretly bid the number of areas that they intend to defend if they are the Soviet player to win the game. For example, I decided I need to defend 3 areas, and you decided you need to defend 4 as the Soviet player. We reveal our selection. The player that has bid the highest becomes the Soviet player, and that is the number of areas that the Soviet player needs to defend to win the game at the end of the game. If that number is not met, then the German player wins the game. The game is super simple. That's one of its strengths, I believe. You take the mess that Stalingrad was and you turn it into a game which is very playable, very linear. So much so that maybe some seasoned war gamers may complain that the game is too linear, is too much about, well, just move some pieces, roll some dice to see how it works, spend those units, repeat, 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 repeat. But there are some reasons why this game is not being just, forgotten in time as, too simple a game, because it's not. It may look like that when you look at the rule book, which is like 4 or 5 pages, one of the shorter rule books in modern wargaming. Look at the rulebook, it may look too linear and straightforward, but in truth, the experience of playing the game has some interesting wrinkles, some interesting nuances. One coming from the cards. Do not neglect those cards. They do add flavor, chrome, and challenge to the game. They give you extra options, they give you extra actions that all feel very thematic, that all give you that amount of surprise that you would expect from Stalingrad. That take that, the sewer movements, unexpected actions, ambushes, traps. That is actually precisely, to me, something that captures the Stalingrad, the Battle of Stalingrad pretty well, because you have this idea, one side that on paper should easily overwhelm the other side, and yet something constantly always happens. It may be a sniper, it may be an ambush, and be something else that was not expected, and somehow, for some reason, the glorious advance of the Nazi army through Stalingrad does not happen. Glorious, of course, in the eyes of those that were attempting to complete it. So it works well in that you have a situation that seems sealed from the beginning, and yet new stuff keeps coming up and you can't see it before it happens, before it hits you. Very, very thematic in the use of the cards. As for the main element, for the main engine, it's still very linear and very straightforward, but it does not feel dull, because you still have some interesting decisions there, choosing when to attack and where to attack, and which how to say, calendar almost. There's a biological feel to it. As your units get spent, then they need to rest, and you have to choose. That means you have to choose when to spend them, how to spend them, in what number, in what order. Are you going to attack from a distance, which allows you to launch an early attack, or you're going to move in and then you expose yourself to more danger? There are some really interesting decisions there, which is simply in dealing with the resources that you have, which are considerable if you are the German player, and yet you always feel like you're just slightly short of, you're just coming short just that much from the objectives that you want to achieve. You think you're gonna capture this or that area that turn, and somehow it doesn't happen. You have that sense of like a very strong resistant obstacle, thanks to the mechanics of the game, that do force you to spend your units, that do delay you constantly, that do force you to expose yourself to dangers if you want to advance. In a certain sense, the system offsets the material advantage that German player you have originally, and that again works very well historically. So it has a thematic feel, and when it comes to gameplay, the elements really go together well, because the two sides have tough choices, tough challenges that feel different from one another, but that are equally interesting. As the Soviet player, you have to spend your resources wisely, but sometimes you do have to be wasteful. You do have to throw some stuff in the face of the Germans to be able to stop some daring advance. As a German player, you're forced to make to progress every turn, or you will not be able to complete your objectives in time. So you have this sense of urgency. You have this sort of like countdown clock that is constantly ticking, and that forces you to try to push towards the Volga no matter what. But of course, if you do matter no matter what, that is not good too. You have to find the balance between being judiciously parsimonious and throwing stuff again when it's needed. So you really have a nice tension there for both sides, between holding ground for the Soviet player and trying to advance for the German player, but at the same time being in for the longer game, looking at the broader picture and see how the actions that you're taking, the heroic defense or the heroic push now, will affect your ability to continue with your strategy later on. So all these elements go very well together. The experience is tense, the experience is exciting. It's a fun game. I'm ashamed that it took me so long to remember about this game, or to remember that I hadn't reviewed it and I haven't brought it to the attention of my fellow War Gamers and my fellow viewers. Storm over Stalingrad is a really good game. I mean, production-wise, it looks good. Yes, the map is on flimsy paper. Yes, the counters are a little thin, but it is still solid. It's still very playable. What it is solid about this game is the design. It's a very strong design. It was a Japanese design originally. Then it was redeveloped for MMP, for the American market. And the result is very solid, very convincing. You have a fun game that is easy to learn. You can teach it to new players. Storm over Stalingrad, not a new game, but a game that I highly recommend to new war gamers. Maybe not as your first war game ever, but the second, the third. I recommend it to newer gamers, to players that are interested in this campaign, players that are interested in area impulse games, and simply players that want a good, simple, rewarding, very playable, very accessible, but still very exciting war game. Storm over Stalingrad has all of those things, and again, there is a reason why this game has been popular since among war gamers, and I hope that with my video I will make this game even more popular again with the new generation of war gamers out there.